The quiet revolution of the soul. There comes a moment in every wounded soul's life when silence becomes their loudest cry, when stillness carries more weight than rage, and when walking away becomes the most defiant act of reclaiming one's dignity. That moment, dear friend, is when you finally say without trembling, without weeping, and without regret, "I am done." Not done in bitterness, not done in revenge, but done in the sacred way the soul whispers, "Enough." To love someone who cannot return that love, who only knows how to consume and never to nourish, is to live in exile while sleeping in your own bed. The narcissist is not merely a flawed person. They are a spiritual void that dresses itself in charm, only to drain the essence from those who love deeply. But you are not void, you are not empty, you are not broken beyond repair. You are becoming, and this message is your mirror, held up not to reflect your pain, but to show you your rising. Let us now walk through 5 pillars of awakening. This is the journey of the soul that finally says no more, and the desperate unraveling of the narcissist who never believed you'd find your way out. Awakening, when the fog lifts and the truth cracks the illusion. There is something hauntingly sacred about the first moment you realize the person you once loved was never really who they appeared to be. It is not a loud revelation, it does not arrive with fireworks or thunder, but rather like a soft knock in the middle of the night, quiet enough that only the weary soul will hear it. It is the murmur of God calling you back to yourself. You do not wake up one morning and suddenly declare, "I'm done." No, it begins far more subtly. It starts when the lies they told stop making sense. When the apology that once softened your heart now sounds rehearsed, insincere, calculated. It starts when you reread an old message and realize how cruel it truly was. It starts when you no longer defend them in your own mind. That's when the fog begins to lift. The narcissistic fog isn't just confusion, it's a spiritual amnesia. It's a forgetting of who you were before their voice became louder than your own. It's a blindness caused not by weakness, but by a love so generous it gave the benefit of the doubt even to evil. But there comes a point, and perhaps that point is now, when the illusion breaks, when the mask slips, and you finally understand, this was never love. This was hunger wearing the face of affection. This was manipulation disguised as care. This was control dressed up in concern. It is in this moment that the soul begins to awaken, not with vengeance, but with clarity, not with hatred, but with truth. And that truth pierces through every falsehood they fed you. That you were too emotional? No, you were passionate. That you were too needy? No, you were honest about your needs. That you were overthinking? No, your intuition was trying to save your life. This is not a simple awakening. It is a spiritual resurrection. Because what they tried to kill in you, your voice, your trust, your intuition, God is now reviving. And this revival doesn't come through external validation. It comes from the deep, private realization that you are still here, still breathing, still standing, even after everything they tried to erase in you. C.S. Lewis once said, "You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body, and in this moment you begin to remember that. You are not just a person with a broken heart. You are a soul reclaiming its ground, a soul waking from sleep, a soul that has endured darkness and now demands light." The narcissist cannot comprehend this awakening. They thought they had you bound forever, caught in guilt, shame, obligation. But you are no longer the puppet they programmed. You are now the author of your own pages, the composer of your own quiet. And when they feel that shift, when they sense that your energy has turned inward, that your gaze is no longer fixed on their approval, that is when they begin to panic. Because for the first time, you are not just pulling away physically, you are retreating spiritually. And once the soul detaches, the game is truly over. You are not going back. Because what's behind you is a house built on lies. And what's ahead is a kingdom of truth. You were never meant to live in survival mode. You were never meant to beg for crumbs. You were never meant to be confused, twisted, shamed, or silenced. You were meant for clarity, for peace, for love that lifts, not love that drains. And so as you stand in this sacred moment of awakening, know this: you are not late, you are not weak, you are not broken. You are rising. And when the narcissist realizes this, when they feel you slipping beyond their grasp, they do not feel remorse. They feel fear, because the one thing they never expected was your freedom. But clarity is not the end, it is the beginning. Once your eyes open, your soul must act. And that's where the true break happens. Not in the mind, but in the will. The moment you choose to sever what once controlled you. Severing control. When you cut the strings, they panic. The most terrifying moment in a narcissist world is not when you scream, not when you fight, not even when you threaten to leave. The moment they fear, the one they never expect to come, is the one when you fall completely silent. And not the silence of confusion or defeat, but the silence of clarity, of resolve, of liberation. It's the moment when the once swayed soul awakens to its full dignity and no longer sees value in being understood by someone who weaponized misunderstanding. It's when you stop defending your name to the one who smeared it, when you stop proving your heart to the one who trampled it, when you stop justifying your presence to the one who only saw your worth when you were gone. This is not merely the end of a relationship. It is the severing of a spiritual tether that once made you believe your healing depended on the person who caused your harm. And the narcissist, so deeply invested in your emotional dependency, begins to feel it. At first they mistake it for distance. Then they interpret it as pride. But eventually they realize what it truly is: separation. Not physical separation. Emotional, energetic, soul deep. They know the pattern is broken. And for someone who lives in loops, the loss of predictability is catastrophic. Your silence is not just an absence to them, it is the unraveling of their illusion. Because their sense of control was never built on power. It was built on access. They had access to your forgiveness, your empathy, your longing for peace. And as long as you were still willing to respond, explain, clarify, they felt safe. They knew they could press buttons and pull strings. But now the strings are cut, and the puppeteer stands powerless on an empty stage, stunned by the absence of the only audience that ever truly mattered. Your withdrawal is not passive, it is violent to their ego, because it tells a story they cannot bear to hear. You no longer need them to feel whole. For the first time, they are left outside the gate they once waltzed through freely. The texts go unanswered. The subtle guilt trips fall flat. The nostalgic memories they try to resurrect feel hollow now, because you no longer seek closure from the one who thrived on confusion. They try everything. They bait you with old words, try to reignite old flames, play the victim who never meant to hurt you, then quickly shift into blame the moment you do not respond. But it no longer works, because you are no longer in the loop. You are no longer tempted by circular conversations that end nowhere. No longer trying to decode mixed messages. No longer contorting yourself into spiritual knots to hold together a connection that was always one-sided. What changed? You did. You finally realized that their power was never theirs. it was borrowed. And the moment you withdrew permission, they collapsed under their own emptiness. This is the unraveling of the narcissist, not in a blaze of drama, but in the steady silence of your departure. You were never chaotic, you were reacting to chaos. You were never too much, you were giving to someone who only knew how to take. You were never weak, you were loyal, far past the point of reason. And now you are no longer accessible. And that, to the narcissist, is devastating, because you were never meant to just leave. You were meant to crawl back. You were supposed to apologize for their cruelty, to question your perception, to ache for their presence, to mourn the loss of a future that was never real. But you didn't. You chose the unthinkable, peace. And now their panic isn't about you. It's about who they become without your light, about the emptiness they feel when your energy is no longer available to animate their false identity, about the truth they cannot silence anymore. They were never the source of your worth. You were, and you remembered, and that remembrance broke every chain they tried to lock you in. You did not burn bridges, you built gates. You did not ghost them, you found God. You did not lose your mind, you reclaimed your soul. They panic because they know the door has closed, and this time, you're not checking to see if they're standing on the other side. If you've come to this place, if you've truly broken the loop, type below, they lost access. I reclaimed my soul. And while you walk away in silence, the narcissist begins to scream inside, because control was their throne, and without it they descend, and that descent is unlike anything you've seen before. The narcissist's descent, from puppeteer to powerless. When a narcissist loses access to you, they do not grieve as you once did. They do not sit in the quiet and search their own hearts. They do not pray, they do not reflect, they do not grow. Instead, they disintegrate, but only on the inside. To the outside world, they may look unfazed. Maybe they even seem happier, smiling more, traveling, posting polished pictures and carefully curated captions. But all of that is just noise, an attempt to reassert the image they so desperately need to survive. Because beneath that surface, they are unraveling. Their entire identity was propped up by control. You were the mirror in which they saw the version of themselves they wanted to believe was real, desirable, important, admired. You reflected their illusion back to them, not because you were weak, but because you were loving. But now the mirror is gone, the reflection has vanished, and the narcissist is left staring into something they cannot endure. The void. The truth is, the narcissist was never whole to begin with. They are, in the deepest sense, a soul in exile, cut off from self-awareness, allergic to accountability, addicted to control. Without someone else to animate their identity, they fall into psychic freefall. You were the scaffold that held up their hollow architecture. Now that you're gone, the structure begins to crack, slowly, quietly, desperately. They spiral, not always in ways the world can see, but in patterns you know well. They scramble for new sources of validation. They search for someone else to play the role you used to fill. They perform, seduce, triangulate, love bomb. But this time something is missing. Because what they truly crave is not a new supply, but the old one that escaped. Because unlike others, you saw them. Not just the mask, but the fear behind the mask. And though they despised you for seeing it, they also depended on you for not naming it, for tolerating it, for staying. But you didn't stay, and now they are left circling the same old patterns, but with one haunting difference. This time, you're not watching. The descent of the narcissist is not a moral tragedy. It is a spiritual one. Because what falls is not just their control over you, it is their illusion of omnipotence. They thought they could not be left, that your soul was bound to them through guilt, through obligation, through trauma. But they were wrong. You left, and with that choice you shattered the mythology they built around themselves. They may try to convince others that they discarded you, that you were unstable, ungrateful, delusional, and many may believe them, at least for a while. Narcissists are skilled performers after all, but deep within, beneath the armor and the charm and the false humility, they know the truth. You didn't break. You woke up. And waking up is something they fear more than anything. Because when one person breaks the illusion, it threatens the entire structure. You were not supposed to see it, not supposed to walk away, and certainly not supposed to heal. But you did all three. This descent doesn't look like collapse, it looks like substitution, new faces, new projects, new distractions. But all of it is hollow, because once someone has tasted true connection, every imitation that follows feels stale, and as much as they try to replace you, they cannot recreate what existed when you were still under the spell, because you no longer are. In truth, what's unraveling is not just their image of themselves, but their understanding of the world. You were the constant, the safe one, the forgiver, the healer, and when even you walked away, it called into question the one thing they cannot allow to be questioned, that they are worth following. Now they see it even if they will never speak it. They are alone, not because the world abandoned them, but because they abused every heart that tried to love them. And the worst part, they know they did it. They just don't know how to stop. Because stopping would mean admitting fault, slowing down would mean facing guilt, and narcissists do not repent, they recycle. They do not confess, they perform. They do not change, they pivot. But none of it brings peace. Their mind is now haunted, not by you, but by the absence of control over you. And for someone who built their identity on the illusion of superiority, your freedom is not just painful, it is condemning. In some quiet hour, alone, exhausted, watching your name remain gray and distant on the screen, they will feel it, the dread that they are no longer significant in your world, that they no longer get to shape your story, that you have somehow outgrown them. In the most terrifying way imaginable, you did not need their destruction to define you. You simply walked away from it. And that, to the narcissist, is the beginning of a fall that never ends. But while they spiral into shadows of themselves, something else is happening on your side of the story, something sacred. You're not just free, you're awakening. And now your light begins to return. The return of light, rediscovering who you were before they dimmed you. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the grief begins to shift, not because the wound has vanished, but because the soul has begun to breathe again. After the chaos, the silence feels foreign. After the trauma, peace feels suspicious. After the narcissist, your own reflection feels unfamiliar. And yet it is still you, buried, silenced, dimmed, but still alive. You begin to feel traces of yourself in unexpected places. A song you forgot you loved, a sunset that takes your breath away, a conversation where you laugh not because you're performing joy, but because it bubbles up from a place you thought was long gone. These are not small things. These are resurrection signs, echoes of the soul you were before you were conditioned to be small. The narcissist didn't just take your time, they took your mirror. They made you question what you saw in yourself, made you doubt your motives, your memories, your goodness. Over time, their voice became louder than your own. You stopped trusting your intuition. You second-guessed your emotions. You edited your light to make it easier for them to stand beside you. But now that voice is gone, and what remains is space. At first that space feels empty, but slowly, gently, it becomes sacred, because it is yours. Your mind no longer occupied by their projections, your heart no longer chasing their approval, your body no longer flinching from their mood swings, your spirit no longer suffocating under their silence. You begin to remember what you loved before the relationship became your obsession. You revisit abandoned hobbies, reconnect with long-lost friends. You find yourself speaking slower, breathing deeper, moving through the world with less urgency to be accepted. You are no longer auditioning, you are existing. And in that existence, something remarkable happens. You find joy without permission. That joy isn't loud, it's not manic, it's not desperate. It's soft, gentle, earned. It may look like journaling by candlelight, like walking barefoot in your garden, like waking up without a knot in your stomach, like crying for no reason other than you finally feel safe enough to feel. This is healing, not the kind that comes in a pill or a new relationship or a self-help quote, but the kind that happens when you stop trying to outrun what happened and start listening to what your soul has been trying to say all along. You were never the problem. You begin to honor the version of yourself that stayed, that endured, that gave, that waited, not to shame her, but to thank her, because she kept you alive long enough to become this. And now you are not just healing, you are transforming, because something beautiful begins to rise when you reclaim your light. Your discernment sharpens, your boundaries strengthen, your prayers deepen. Your loneliness no longer feels like punishment, but possibility. You become unrecognizable to the person you were when you still needed them. And perhaps most sacred of all, you begin to see God again. Not as the silent witness to your pain, but as the loving hand that never left your side, waiting patiently for you to turn toward the light again. You feel divine presence in the stillness, in the redirection, in the strength that no longer comes from armor, but from knowing who you are in Him. Because God did not create you to be consumed. He did not form you in your mother's womb so you could spend your life walking on eggshells. He did not knit together your heart just so someone could unravel it for sport. He created you for fullness, for beauty, for radiant love. And now, having walked through the fire, you carry that radiance not as someone untouched by suffering, but as someone reborn through it. You no longer beg to be chosen. You know you already are. You no longer plead to be heard. You are learning to hear yourself. You no longer search for home in someone else's chaos. You are building it within. This is the return of your light, not the same light that once shined so naively, but a refined light, a wiser light, a holy light, one that knows how to shine without seeking permission, one that cannot be dimmed by manipulation, one that recognizes false love and walks away before it burns again. The narcissist did not expect this. They counted on your silence becoming permanent, your self-doubt becoming your identity. But instead, your soul did what God designed it to do when darkness tries to crush it. It rose. And now the one who once cast a shadow over you can no longer touch the warmth of who you've become. You are no longer seeking to be loved by someone who cannot love. You are becoming someone who loves without losing themselves. And that, dear soul, is the miracle they never saw coming. But rediscovering yourself is not the final chapter, it's the foundation, because from here true healing begins. Not survival, not escape, but deep, soul-rooted healing that transforms everything. True healing begins after you walk away. There is a lie, that many survivors of narcissistic abuse carry long after the narcissist is gone. The belief that leaving is the end of the story. That if you just walk away, block the number, close the door, peace will arrive like morning light and wash it all away. But healing, real healing, does not begin the moment you leave. It begins the moment you realize you were never meant to stay. You may physically walk out of the relationship one day, but it takes longer for your mind to leave, longer still for your heart to catch up, because long after the narcissist disappears, the echo of their voice can still linger in the chambers of your thoughts. Their criticisms can still whisper through your self-doubt. Their silence can still ring louder than any noise. This is where the true work begins. Not in escaping them, but in rebuilding yourself in the spaces they once occupied. This is no longer about survival. It is about rebirth. Healing is slow. It is sacred, and it does not happen by accident. It happens when you choose every day to show up for yourself in the very places they tried to destroy. You begin by tending to your mind. You no longer feed on their narrative of you. You dismantle the false beliefs that were planted in you like seeds of shame, that you were too much, not enough, too emotional, too weak. And you replace them with truths, gentle truths, deep truths, truths that do not need to shout to be believed, truths that say you are worthy, you are whole, you are not defined by the ones who could not love you properly. Then you tend to your body, the places that held tension, that braced for emotional whiplash, that flinched at the sound of their tone. You let your nervous system unwind. You give yourself permission to rest, to feel safe, to no longer be on high alert. You learn that love should never come with adrenaline, that safety is not earned through submission. You tend to your spirit. You pray, not for them, but for your own restoration. You ask God to show you who you were before their voice became louder than His. You seek comfort, not in answers, but in presence. And you begin to feel something rise within you, not bitterness, not vengeance, but dignity. Because healing is not becoming who you were before the abuse. It is becoming who you were always meant to be had the abuse never touched you. And slowly you stop defining yourself by what was done to you. You begin to define yourself by what you are doing with it. You stop rereading the story of your suffering and you begin to write the story of your strength. You find purpose in the wreckage, not as a way to justify the pain, but as a way to transcend it. You realize that while they tried to use your love against you, God is using your pain to grow you into something untouchable. Not because you're hard now, but because you're holy. You no longer feel the need to be understood by the narcissist. You no longer seek an apology. You no longer look back. Because you finally understand what you needed was never their remorse, it was your release. The most powerful form of closure is not receiving an answer. It is living as though the question no longer owns you. Healing looks like choosing silence over drama, peace over chaos, stillness over stimulation, solitude over performance. Healing looks like waking up and realizing the first thing on your mind is no longer them. It's you, your day, your peace, your purpose. Healing looks like rebuilding your relationship with God, not through desperation, but through gratitude. Not because you're trying to be rescued, but because you've already been redeemed. You start to see life differently. You no longer walk into rooms wondering if you're good enough. You walk in asking, is this space worthy of me? You no longer sacrifice your boundaries to keep people comfortable. You keep your boundaries because they are the evidence of your healing. You no longer tolerate confusion disguised as love. You recognize love by its fruits: peace, safety, clarity, presence. And perhaps the greatest mark of healing is this: you no longer need to be rescued, because you've become your own protector. What the narcissist feared most has now become your truth. You are fully in your power. Not the kind of power that dominates or proves, but the kind of power that quietly, unshakably knows its value, knows its limits, knows that not every knock at the door deserves an answer, knows that the voice of God is gentler than the voice of manipulation, and infinitely more loving. You are no longer surviving their absence. You are thriving in your presence. This is healing, this is wholeness, this is what they said you would never reach. And yet here you are, no longer afraid of the silence, because you've realized the silence was always your soul waiting to speak.